Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Biz Essentials podcast. I'm your host, Veronika, and today we're going to be speaking with Anna Runkle, also known as the Crappy Childhood Fairy. If you guys haven't heard of her, she's got an awesome YouTube channel. You should definitely check it out. If you're joining me today because you are one of Anna's followers or subscribers, a true fan like myself, thank you so much for joining me. This podcast is all about being yourself to be successful, productive, and joyful. We cover everything from business tips, tools and strategies to learning how to emotionally regulate, which is what I hope to speak with Anna about. We're going to be talking all about childhood PTSD, how to work through your triggers, how to be successful by being yourself. It's going to be a great conversation, so stick around and I'll be back right after this.
Tony Robbins once said, "No matter how many mistakes you make or how slow you progress, you are still way ahead of everyone who isn't trying." This is the Biz Essentials. You want to grow, get ahead, keep the spark. Here you'll get valuable insights and empowerment to grow personally and professionally. Isn't it about time you turn your dreams into successful passion projects? Learn how to be productive, be successful, be joyful, and more importantly, be yourself. The Be Essentials. This is the Biz Essentials. And this is your host, Veronika of Veronika Ventures.
Welcome back, everybody. We're back with Anna Runkle. Anna, I know tons about you, but not everyone in my audience might. So could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do?
I'm known online as the Crappy Childhood Fairy, and I teach people how to identify the signs of childhood PTSD and how to heal them in a way that they can manage themselves.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of your YouTube channel, so thank you very much for being on my show. I'm going to try not to get all fangirl on you. But I am curious, you obviously have a huge YouTube presence now, but what led you to starting that channel?
Yeah, it was kind of a surprising turn in my life. Back in 1994, I was in a really bad place. My own childhood trauma was just sitting there lurking. And I had this very bad couple of weeks where I was attacked on the street violently. Somebody dumped me and my mom died, like all at once.
Oh, wow.
And I went into this like bad PTSD place. And back in 1994, they did a brain scan. They said, your brain's fine. You're fine. Go home. Goodbye. And now we know that I had this underlying complex PTSD, the kind that comes from chronic stress. I had a kind of a rough childhood. My mom was an alcoholic, and we had a lot of the stuff that went with that. And so this one couple of weeks where everything bad happened, my PTSD was so bad. I couldn't read. I couldn't drive a car. I couldn't dial a telephone. I was just so discombobulated and really freaked out and depressed. And my jaw was broken from the attack. It was this very intense time. And I wasn't doing very well. And I was going to therapy 3 times a week. And she'd say, let's talk again about what happened when the guys came out of the car and started beating you. And talking about it, just even saying it right now, like, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to hear about it. I'm really healed about it. But even just talking about trauma is very, very triggering for me. And my life was basically saved by this young woman who was just like an acquaintance of mine. And I confided in her that I was feeling like I couldn't go on. I was giving her a ride. We were in this theater group together. And she said, do you want to come in and have a cup of tea? And we went in. She lived in this cool warehouse. She was covered with tattoos. And she started to talk to me about like what she had been through. And she'd been through the ringer. And for her, a lot of it was alcoholism. For me, it wasn't so simple. It's like, I don't know why I'm so weird. I don't know why I'm struggling so much. She said, do you want to learn this technique that I use to get sober? And she showed me how to start writing the fearful, resentful thoughts in my mind on paper and then like writing a little prayer to ask them to be removed. And at the time, I'm like, prayer, yuck. I don't like people who talk like that. But she had tattoos and I was like, well, okay. And I gave it a try. And I had such a phenomenal transformation in me that I've never stopped using this technique. Well, that's not true. I've stopped here and there, sometimes getting fed up or feeling like I don't like where my life is going. But I quickly found out that when I don't use this writing and I follow it with a meditation, this is a very simple thing I'm describing. And if anybody wants to learn it, I'm going to give a link to you that you can share with everybody. I have a free course. You can just learn it and download the PDF. But it's so simple, and it started to help me come together. I was instantly out of that PTSD thing. I could pay attention, I could read, I could drive, and I started to feel happy. I stopped feeling depressed. And now this was 1994, and a lot of things have happened in my life since then. I've had problems, money problems, man problems, became a mom, married, divorced, married again. All these things, started 3 different companies, and it's just carried me through. And I never knew what it was. I never knew why it worked so well. So I showed it to hundreds of people, and helped them and trained them. And people would come to me, and sometimes I put the word out, like I have this thing that helps. In my living room, I'd say, everybody can come to my house Tuesday night, and 15 people would come. And it was just like this calling that I had to show people how to feel better when they felt distressed. But I never knew what I had was PTSD, and I never knew that what this was doing for me was helping me to re-regulate my brain. And I put it all together. There was this sort of renaissance in books about complex PTSD, 2014, 15. One of the big books for me was Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score. One book was Pete Walker's C-PSTD, From Surviving to Thriving. And what I learned when I read those books is this is a thing. The symptoms I have are totally normal for somebody who grew up traumatized, and that you can learn to calm your symptoms. Now, those books didn't end up being the end-all, be-all for me, but together with the techniques that I'd been doing, I started doing all this research. I started showing people, like, that's it. I have to start a blog. In 2016, I started a blog. I was putting up posts every now and then about this thing and this technique, and I made a video how to do the writing. I made this little video and put it up there. And I don't know what I had, 60 blog followers or something, like, yay, 60. That's a lot of people, right? But then one day I went to go put another video. I was going to stream it into the blog, and I was hosting it on YouTube. And I went over there and I was like, whoa, I've got like 2,000 subscribers over on YouTube. So that was surprising because I didn't even mean to be on YouTube. I was just using it to stream into my blog. And so it became known to me that video was a really good medium for me to talk about my healing, that there's something about when I'm talking. I'm a good writer, but just my silly self, I get weepy sometimes when I'm talking about it, or I'm laughing, and I love to keep it lighthearted. Obviously, it's very serious too. But I talk about what it's like to have complex trauma. And the more that I've shared my experience, the more I get these comments back. And now I get like hundreds of letters a day, and people just going, nobody has ever described to me what it's like to be me. And they have that same feeling of relief I had. This is a thing. I'm not crazy. I'm not a bad person. I have a thing. It's a normal, ordinary response to trauma. And we haven't done anything wrong, and we can heal it. So that's been just the great joy of my life. So I had this other business, but now this is what I do. This is entirely what I do. It just caught on like wildfire. And it's my pleasure, to now be this crappy childhood fairy.
That's so awesome. And before we continue, for our audience who might not know what dysregulated means, a very common cliche word now these days is triggered, but dysregulated is a much better word because I don't like the word triggered.
Yeah, triggered has a lot of baggage.
Right.
Nobody wants to be the triggered girl.
Right, exactly. And I feel like, especially even when my kids do it, it drives me crazy. People use it as like something upset me, which is so not the same thing.
Right.
Not to be completely really triggered as opposed to something just kind of pissed me off. And so I like the word dysregulated. And I have to say, when I first started this healing journey, or my healing journey a couple years ago, when I was really in a bad place, and my husband couldn't understand why I would just get so angry and couldn't let it go over like the littlest, tiniest things in his point of view. I found your video on what it felt like to be dysregulated, and I showed it to him, and he finally like got it. Like, it was so empowering. And that's how I became a huge fan, because I was like, yes, she gets it. And you make it like understandable. There's science behind it, but also very consumable for just like the regular person. You don't have to have PTSD to understand, and you don't have to be a doctor to understand what you're saying, but it's also still very rooted in science, which is great.
Well, we need tools sometimes to communicate to people what this is, because it is not easy being a partner to somebody with C-PTSD, not all the time. I mean, we are great people. We have huge hearts and compassion. We've been through things. We get it. But we get triggered. That word triggered, forget whatever everybody else means by it. Dysregulation is a neurological state that can be measured, and it gets set off by a stimulus sometimes. Like some people really get it from a loud noise, or from just being tired, or from getting criticized, or suspecting that people are angry at them, or not being invited to a party when they know everybody else was. All of these things can set off a trigger, and especially if there's some sort of like damage from childhood. And I don't really go there. It's like we don't have to know what caused it. Some of it, we don't even know. I wake up sometimes in an emotional flashback. I don't even know what it's about, but I just wake up like in this terrible state of mind. And it turns out that's a thing too, and that's part of it. And it's probably from some pre-verbal experience, but I wake up sometimes just like, I have to do everything. And nobody, not my husband, not my kids, they never will do anything. And this is my lot in life, and I'm just going to be stoic, except I hate them. And my husband will just look at me and he'll just see my energy and just be like, okay, I'm going to go to the other room now. He knows like something's brewing in me. And part of my healing is, it's not that I never go into a dysregulated state or a flashback. It's not that I never do, but I recognize it. And I have the skills now, like I know what to do about it. If I can get the humility to just go, yeah, that's going on. It's never, like when it's happening, it seems so real. Something like, I have to do everything, or I don't need you, I don't need anybody. I have these like old states of mind in there, and they're like a flashback, and it feels real. And it used to be a point of pride to not back down about that, when it was happening, and somebody would go, come on, you're being a little unreasonable. I'm like, no, I'm not. And that's exactly how we ruin relationships. And I finally got where I didn't want to ruin relationships, and I was willing to be open-minded and humble. And see, like, if I can pause right now while this is happening, notice it's happening, go use my tools. Could I come back to this conversation later in a better state of mind? And the answer is yes. And it changes everything. And we really, really do need to be loved. Everybody does, and we do too. And we got deprived of it. That's often why there's a traumatic injury there. And so it's really important. It's really important to learn how to be in a loving relationship with friends, with partners, with everybody, and just to get along with people. Another area that can be really hard, and I get a lot of people in the audience be like, I have that too. Did I do the right grammar there? A lot of people be like, I have that too. But you know what I mean. And yes. But I
have that too.
Yeah. Being in groups. Like, so it's like really good at first, and you're like, I'm going to volunteer to be a chair of the committee. And then very soon it gets really triggering, and it starts to feel fraught, and like, oh, they all know each other and they're the cool girls. And I just, all this stuff comes up. And then next thing you know, I'm holding myself out at the periphery of the group or leaving altogether. So I had this long history of like leaving everything I'd ever been part of. And that's been a big piece of healing too, is to be able to like be in relationship to a group. And have some boundaries, and not just go rushing in and be like chair of the committee, but just like, I don't know, let me check it out. Let me take care of myself while I do that. Let me do this thing I call titration. It's from medicine, where you go in a little bit and then come out a little bit, like get yourself equilibrated, just kind of digest, handle it, now go in again. And you don't just like dive in. And I don't know about you, but the biggest area that needs titration in my life was romance. To go in a little bit, hold, have a boundary, go slow, handle it, and not just rush in with a big idea like this is, oh my gosh, I found true love. I'm in. And, now I've abandoned my whole life and all my friends, and now I don't even remember who this is. And I don't like them. So there's just practical skills like this. It used to be a mystery to me. I used to go to therapists, and they'd be like, you seem intelligent, you seem like you have it together, but you just are making the most idiotic mistakes over and over again. They wouldn't say idiotic, but I saw it in their face, okay? Right? I saw what they were thinking. It was idiotic, and it didn't make sense. And so we now know that in that state of dysregulation, like this is what happens. A person who was really stressed as a kid has brain changes. And that's where the dysregulation is coming from. And if you do a brain scan on an adult who as a kid was highly stressed, traumatized, what you'll see when they think about something, if I tell you something like, oh, your house is on fire or something, and you had a brain scan on somebody who didn't have PTSD, they'd have this thinking activity over here in the left front cortex, reasoning like, I got to do something. And then feeling over here, oh no, I'm scared. For us, it's like, this comes down. Thinking is suppressed, emotions go up. So it's this big lopsided brain activity under stress. And that's about what it feels like. Reasoning off, emotions going crazy. And that's how we end up making rash decisions to rush into a relationship or to quit a job or something like that. For me, understanding that and just having the courage to admit, that's been going on for me for a long time. It just explained so much. Why do I make these weird decisions? An hour later, I realize I've made a terrible mistake, but why is that happening in the moment? And it's because I have a really normal brain for somebody who went through a lot as a kid.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think someone once told me, or recently told me, that trauma has become a kind of a buzzword. And I actually, at first I was like, oh, do I like that? But I do, because I feel like right now in this time, because our age group who had trauma and is getting to the age where we can actually do something about it is kind of creating this movement. And you talked about a movement on one of your videos. For those of us who want to facilitate this movement, what are some things that we can do to kind of help our community, so to speak, understand us and be able to work within that?
I think one problem is there isn't really a community. It's not a community. It's a bunch of people who have been suffering alone all over the world. In Crappy Childhood Fairy, I have online courses. We have a membership program. We have the secret Facebook group. I lead these Zoom calls every week, and people come in, and it has become a community, and it's been really incredible for all of us. Never have I felt so closely identified and really one of the gang as when I'm with other people who were traumatized as kids, whether or not it was alcoholism, just traumatized as kids, and who have this weird brain thing, that goes on where we totally get each other. And so YouTube is kind of a community. It's thin soup, it's not people, but it is people. And one of my great accomplishments, I'm pretty strict about what people say on my channel in the comments. And so if people say anything hateful to me or other people there, I just take them out. I'll tell anybody who's going there, don't even bother, because we'll find it and we'll take it out. And we see no point. People say, oh, it's free speech. It's no, free speech is you get to put your stuff on YouTube. But
Right.
This is my living room where my friends come for safety. So we have this really loving community, or we try to. And when people come in, they are astonished to find that everybody's talking to each other and putting supportive comments, and that I think people have actually found friends to connect with outside of that. That's, people from all over the world are on YouTube. I teach this free course, so a lot of people come to that too. And every time I lead this free course, there's 100, 200 people on Zoom with me. Or I do, we practice these techniques that I teach, and then I take questions. There is just nothing more fun for me than being in that community, because just like what they're experiencing, hearing me and each other talk about what it's like, I'm hearing it too. I thought I was the only one. My life was really hitting the skids as I was trying to wrestle with this thing that I thought was me, just just being a bitch, really, just what's wrong with me? I get too angry at things, and then I just flake out on people so selfishly, and just because I just feel like I can't cope or something. Mostly I did really well, but I would just disappoint people in this way. And then once I knew what it was, once you have a name for it, first of all, half that shame comes off. You're okay. So I have this injury. It's not an identity. It's not a character problem. It's an injury. It's a neurological injury. That's where it starts. But here's the thing. If you live your life dysregulated, and that's how you've done all your dating and all your jobs, and you have made these kind of blunders, then you do kind of end up with life problems, usually financial, romantic, relational with people. Your self-esteem's not good. And dysregulation has a huge effect. This is a nervous system dysregulation. It has a huge effect on your physical body, on your immune system, on your endocrine system, the way you metabolize carbohydrates. That's just a lot of weight problems have to do with trauma. Not avoiding
Yes.
sex by being fat, maybe overeating, maybe emotional eating, but also just hormones get weird from trauma. There's so much that they used to psychologize and blame us for and say, oh, it's in your head, or you're just trying to avoid things. Well, maybe my leptin and insulin got out of whack because that's what trauma does. And it has nothing to do with anything I did consciously. So we learn it's not our fault. It's actually like totally not our fault that we got PTSD. And nobody's going to fix it except for maybe us. Nobody's going to. Nobody can. So what I saw, in my life was, and I started there, but it was all this like, let's talk about what happened. I'd be like, well, my mom was an alcoholic and I grew up really poor and, I got really neglected and I didn't have medicine and I didn't have dental work and I was hungry. And the story is so compelling. And you will always find therapists who will hear that story for years if you want to talk about it. But telling the story was not getting me anywhere. Meanwhile, I was in these just completely horrid relationships and getting stuck, having so much potential in my career. And then, having some moment in a meeting where I just kind of said something that was way too harsh and lost an opportunity. Just things like that, just getting held back. We never talked about that. Nobody could tell me why I did that. So my point was being in this community, the YouTube comments, the letters I get from people, the courses I teach, I do these coaching groups and things too. And it's so healing for me too, because people tell me their experience. And every time somebody's describing what it's like for them, I'm like, oh, thank God, I have that too. I totally get it. I'm normal. You're normal. We're okay. There's nothing wrong here. We're going to be okay, and we can heal this. When you have a name for it, there's a lot of power. Part 2, which is harder for some people, is to start going, I've been making mistakes. I'm going to have to change this. And I didn't learn how to do this right at home. I didn't learn it there, but I'm going to learn it now. I'm going to have a delayed development. I'm going to learn how to say thank you, how to say I'm sorry, how to go on a date, how to pay attention to my kids and discipline them appropriately. It's all learned. You can learn it though.
Yeah, and it is incredibly difficult, I find, to learn those things if you are not in a state of acknowledging where you are, where you were, and where you're going. Because for a very long time, first of all, I blocked out a lot of my trauma, and then I lost 170 pounds in a dock game rushing back. But yeah, I know it was not a good time. But once I actually started going, okay, that is trauma, stop blocking it out, and all the other stuff that you minimized, also trauma, I had a lot more compassion for myself. And that actually helped with the healing and helped with me being able to move forward and learn the skills that I needed to learn, because it wasn't just me being stupid or having being defective. That was my big thing. I'm like, I'm defective. Someone should just return me to the factory. Because I could see okay, first of all, through media like yours, where I'm like, okay, I'm not the only one. And I deserve the space and the time to be able to heal that. And that was a huge game changer for me. One thing that I love about your channel and why I started sharing my story on other podcasts was because a lot of when I was growing up, everything was a secret. And so it was a lot of just pretending to be okay. And I think that because we have that shame from whatever happened in our childhood, and we were told to pretend that everything's okay, to keep up the facade, it's difficult for us to share with other people. And so it does become a very isolated thing. You do feel alone. So I hope that through this podcast, and obviously through your channel, you're building this huge community of people who can see that they're not alone. So I would love to keep perpetuating that. While you were talking, it came to me, you recently did a video about perception and how can you trust your perception if you've had a traumatic childhood and everything kind of feels a little distorted. And I feel that way in relationships. You mentioned romance, and luckily for me, I got married kind of young, and he's a good guy. So thank God, because God knows what could have happened if I hadn't met him. But friendships are extremely difficult for me. What do you do when you can't trust your perception, or when people say, just go with your gut instinct? I'm like, I don't know what my gut instinct is. I feel like it's wrong all the time.
Yeah.
How do you fix that?
We do have gut instinct, but it's complicated, and it sometimes has been invaded by fearful and resentful thoughts. So that's why just trust your gut instinct is not really good advice for some of us, not for me, but it is in there. And sometimes we have to be more patient with ourselves to get to it and use a process. So for me, my gut instincts were terrible, absolutely terrible before. And I remember before I had any way to heal from this at all, like in my 20s, even my emotions were always like, they were backwards or something. I would be like, I'm so angry. I don't know why. And it would really be sadness, but it was like distorting into anger. And then when I was angry, I would get depressed and everything was just like cross-wired. I was so used to pressing down. I don't know. I can't even explain it, but my nervous system was whacked from all of this. And I was trying to, it is really important when you're young to figure out, how do I act normal? How do I fit in with the other kids? How do I find somebody to date? How do I get somebody to hire me? Like, that's important. That's not foolish. But then come the feelings. And I think that's so interesting that you had a major weight loss. And it is so common, I'm sure you know that after sexual abuse to have a significant weight gain. And that sometimes losing that weight, that's how the ACEs study was discovered, was studying women who had major weight loss and had the same thing you described. It all came flooding back. They gained the weight back. What bothers me about that is the legend still goes. And then they figured out that all those women were just trying to avoid like sexual attention. And I questioned that. I question everything. I'm always taking all these common assumptions about things and going, is that really true? And that's why I bring up the endocrine thing. Like, it turns out there are significant endocrine changes. I think that people who have significant weight gains are probably all over the map about things. They're all different people. They're individuals, And some of them might be trying to avoid sex, and some of them might be really happy to find a mate. And it's all different. And so I've noticed that all my life, that a lot of assumptions get put on people, especially people who are different from the researchers themselves. It used to be because they were men and they didn't really understand women, or because I grew up poor and there's a lot of like stereotypes about poor that I defy.
Right.
And, or having trauma, which is invisible to people. And I just find that a lot of the assumptions about trauma, even right now by prominent people out there, it just doesn't sound right to me. I don't relate to what they're saying. I hope they're successful. But I just, if you go Google like C-PSTD and look up the symptoms, they're, I don't know. They're a little weird. It's not even a diagnosis in the United States. It's not even recognized. But it's definitely, it's clinically distinct from regular old PTSD, which is something that would come from like one event, whereas complex PTSD and childhood PTSD is a subset of that, the biggest subset of it. It comes from like chronic ongoing stress, like growing up in a chaotic household where there was constant fear of not having food or getting hit or whatever it was. So where were we going with this?
I have no idea.
I don't know, but it was so interesting.
It was, and I'm really enjoying the conversation. I'm trying to steer us into place, but we were talking about how do you follow your instinct, or how can you
instincts,
know?
yeah. Okay. So one of the things that happened to me as a kid, I was considered a worrywart, and at a young age, I didn't know what was going on with my mom, but I would feel like really unsettled and anxious about stuff. She used to leave. She would just like meet some guy and take off for a month at a time, starting when I was a baby. So I had this like really insecure attachment. And then she would say, I think you should join Girl Scouts. And I'd be like, no freaking way. I'd be like out of the house after school. Like, I don't dare. I would just like want to like glom onto her. I was so driven to try to like hold on to things. And then I had younger siblings, like much younger siblings, and I took care of them. And so a lot of my life, like, you don't know anything different when you're a kid. So I would hear my sister cry when I was 6 and she was newborn. I'd hear her cry and I'd get up and I'd make her a bottle and get her back to sleep. Like, I didn't know till later, till somebody said, that's weird. Where was your mom or dad? It's like, oh, well, they were passed out, And what got to me is they always said, now your sister was such a good baby. It's like, she was just a baby like any other baby. She cried in the middle of the night and needed milk, and they just weren't aware of it. So They would say to me, and I would just say, I don't know, I'm just freaking out. We lived in San Francisco, and when you drive up the hills, on these steep hills of San Francisco, sometimes you can see the crest of the hill, but you can't see what's on the other side. And when you're a little kid in the back seat, no seatbelt, of course, it's the 60s, right? In the back seat, it's just like this terrible thing where it just looks like it's a cliff. and the whole car is going to go off a cliff. And I would just be absolutely freaking out all the time. This is the time we're going to drive off a cliff. And they'd go, no, it's a hill. Trust me, we'll go over the top of it and you'll see it's a hill. But I would just over and over again be panicking that we're driving off a cliff. I guess I believed that my parents would do such a thing. They were acting so rash and everything else. So I would say, I'm really scared this is a cliff. And they go, no. And as I grew older and I started to realize what was going on was drunkenness. We were driving once in San Francisco in a VW bus, and we went up on 2 wheels going around a corner too fast with my mom driving. And I jumped out of the car. And she goes, oh, get back in the car. You're being so dramatic. And I was always called that. You're such a worrywart. You're so dramatic. So they were always trying to, I guess you call it gaslighting now, but they were just always telling me wrong information about, I'd go, I feel like this is a dangerous situation. And my mom had friends who were unsafe men to have around the kids. And I'd be like, Mom, this guy, he's not safe. And he did something to my friend. I don't want you to have him over. And she'd be like, oh my gosh, you really think you're better than everybody, don't you? So there was always this kind of like wrong information coming in. I think I underestimated till I was older. And I really, I've learned a lot about myself from hearing other people and going, oh, you know what? I have that too. I don't have to be tough about it anymore. I'm totally free to be introspective and just be like, yeah, I have really weird judgment about that. This is so weird. I remembered this thing about my mom died 30 years ago. So, all of my memories are quite old with her. But when I was, 18 or something, and I said, this guy somewhere, I forget where it was, he's hitting on me and I just want him to leave me alone. And she said, oh, tell him you have herpes. Tell him you have herpes. And that was some old strategy of hers to get a guy to stop pestering you without offending him. And, I was just thinking about that the other day. I'm just like, I hope I've given my kids much better information than that. If somebody's pestering them, you know what you do? You go, stop it. Stop it now. This isn't okay. That's what you do.
Right, exactly.
You're allowed to do that.
Yeah, I wasn't taught that either.
Yeah, so it ends up doing a number on your perception. And that's the main voice that people seem to have. And I think the video you're talking about, I titled it, Is It Just Me? And that's the feeling is I think that somebody is threatening or unsafe for me or putting me down or something, but maybe it's just me. And we go into this cloud of confusion. It's probably just me. And it's a terrible, disempowered state to be in because you can't interpret reality. You cannot interpret reality. So there's 2 things involved in my approach to healing that are just core that I would recommend to anybody, even if you don't use my techniques. But one is there has to be a way to unpack the thoughts. Some people do that through, jujitsu, and some people do that through therapy. I don't do so well when I'm talking about it, and I'm very lazy. So as for jujitsu, it's a very it's a verbal thing for me. It's thoughts. It's these fearful and resentful thoughts, and writing them on paper. This is also now I know is supported by science. This woman with the cup of tea back in 1994, writing these negative thoughts on paper, and not just ranting about it. The technique she taught is, I write down, I have fear, I'm no good, fear of this, fear I can't tell this person to F off, or fear they're going to hate me, or fear I'll be in trouble, or fear I'm going to get fired, or, and then I can write about the resentful thoughts too. And that process, it just has a power to get it out of here, where we're like, like when you're trying to remember something, but you can't write it down and you can't find a pen. You get it on paper and you can forget about it. And then you have this clear spell. It'll come back because we're human, but you have this little period where it's okay. And then in that time, you do a simple meditation where you rest your mind. And what I think is happening there, based on what I experience all these years doing it, is I think my mind is able to kind of reorganize itself in the way that it does during sleep, or in the way that for a newborn, when you nurse them, they when they're hungry, they're just dysregulated, and then by holding them and feeding them, they're like, and then they're done, and they come out and they smile and they look you in the eye and they're present. And so there's this transformation. That's what those 2 things do for me. So learning how to re-regulate yourself is one thing, and get that the stressful thinking out that's just so noisy in there. The second thing, and this is when I had to concede reluctantly, but we must have other people to do this. And I hate that because like everyone with C-PTSD, like I'm fiercely independent. I don't want to count
Right.
on anybody. That's too vulnerable. That's too fraught. Bad things will come, and they have, but
Right.
and when everybody's like, "Oh, my life was so hard," and then I met all my friends, and it's so great. I'm always just like sitting on the edges, like I didn't meet my friends. They didn't stand by me. So that whole narrative doesn't really work for me. But I'm having to concede. No, we really need other people. There's a whole piece of our development that only happens through relation to other people. And that is a lot of where the original injury of trauma came, is not having that responsiveness from our parents, caregivers, not having somebody like really be paying attention. And they did. I mean, my mom, she was a loving mom. She just was drunk, so she wasn't that responsive, and, she'd take off. We all know now that every baby, even baby animals, baby mammals they need that mother to be looking at them right back in the eye and touching them and responding to what they say. And the baby says, goo goo, and the mom says, goo goo, or dad. And that's how our brains develop. And without that, we just end up with this, I don't know, these neurons just kind of twirling around in there looking for a home. That's a metaphor. It's not scientific. But we just have this sort of chaos in there that needs to land. And so there we need other people. And I do find that what I thought was like a permanent damage in me is really more like a developmental delay. I didn't totally learn how to connect with people and have that reflection with them and be able to hear them and see them and have empathy for them and to feel seen and heard and cared for. Like that was a little bit stuttery in me. And it's harder for some people than others. But through connecting with other people and practicing, and definitely like having a spouse. I have a wonderful husband now too, which was a long journey to get to that point, but it is very healing to have, that person who is right there and looks me in the eye. And if I say like, I'm really nervous or I'm sad about this, I get a hug. I mean, that's just profound. It's life-changing from that isolation that we once had. It's also, as you know, as I'm sure you know, like sometimes it's like really stressful to have a partner too, or to have kids. Like it's wonderful, and it's for a person with C-PTSD, it can be very triggering and hard some days. But
oh my goodness, yeah, my kids are probably my biggest trigger. And in fact, last year when COVID started, that was very, very bad for me at first. And then it led into this wonderful, transformation of myself. But they were all the ages that I was when I was abused at different times by different people. So it was like, I would look at them and I would see myself and it was like, ah. So it was really difficult for me. But I'm interested on when you're forming relationships. I watched a few of your videos where you talk about this. The difficulty for me is not only the perception of it and my interpretation of their reactions to things, because I might say something and mean it in jest or in humor, and like I think they get it and they don't, and it becomes hurtful, and I'm just like,
yeah,
I have like no ability to read people, apparently. I thought I did, but so there's that portion of it. But also I feel like even when I do get close to people, and this happens even with my closest of family members, it's like almost like this barrier between me and them, like on an emotional level. I don't think I'm quite there yet because my therapist says I don't connect to my emotions. But how can we work past those things? Have you experienced that, or do you have any techniques that might help with that?
Well, I'm a broken record in that I use this one technique for everything to just keep like calming my brain and proceeding with my life for a few hours until it happens again. And then I calm my brain and I carry on. That's the main thing I do. And then I do what everybody else does. Sometimes I have to go talk it out or study something or go take a nap or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But that disconnection, yesterday I interviewed a guy named Paul Micallef in Australia he's autistic, and he teaches other autistic people emotional intelligence and dating. And it's fascinating for me. And I wanted to talk to him because while C-PTSD and autism are two different things with different origins, this is, autism is a genetic thing, you're born with it, and C-PTSD is more of an injury. But what they have in common is that difficulty reading people, very hard to read other people, or feel the relative gravity of something, or know the right thing to say. And for autistic people, that's what it's like too. And he teaches emotional intelligence. And it was helping me to understand and accept, like sometimes if something's hard for us, we need to learn a workaround. So one of the things I teach, I have a course about dating and relationships for people with C-PTSD. And that course is very near to my heart. This is something I never, like nobody else ever, it was very hard to get this information about how to do it, but it's a series of workarounds to compensate for that weird attachment injury where people like me would rush in, would have trouble gathering information, would end up completely bonded with somebody way too soon by sleeping with them. And then no matter what I was observing after that was making me unhappy about them, being unable to leave because abandonment was too treacherous to go through. It's a prison that people go through. It's horrible.
Yeah.
So in my course, I teach workarounds that you do for that. So you can pace yourself. You can set up a structure for dating. The thing that I recommend for people to begin with is first write down what you really want. I have yet to meet somebody who's in any kind of early stage recovery from healing from their trauma that can say what they want. It becomes very fuzzy. What do you really want in a relationship? And one thing that I hear people, like, are you married?
I am.
Yeah, me too. And I always wanted to be married, but I got acculturated, and I think a lot of people have, to never admit that. I thought that was embarrassing. I thought that would put too much pressure on guys I was dating. Well, that's just dumb. Like, if you're going to hide that that's what you want, it's misleading. It's just setting you up for failure. And you're giving people who only want a one-night stand or a casual thing, you're giving them the signal that that's what you want too. And that's a terrible thing to do. And it's not only like unfair to other people, but it's just disastrous for fulfilling your life, the life that you want. I knew when I was 3 years old, I wanted to get married and have kids. That was always like what I was made of. That's just something I knew about myself. And when I was 35 years old, I was still like dating and being really dishonest. And whatever the guy said he wanted, that's what I'd say I wanted too. And then I would sort of like vaguely hope it would, I'd change him, by being so incredible. But that kept not happening. It just kept not happening. And it would be just devastating to me, like to have a guy break up with me because I expected too much that many times was just so destructive to me. And so I got this idea that my expectations were the problem, but actually it was my attachments that were the problem. And so I teach people, like, get really clear about what that is. And now, like, wear it on your sleeve. I'd like to get married, and I'm looking for somebody who is also interested in children or is not interested in children or who, has this faith or lack thereof and who's this type or this type. And you can be very specific about what would be a good person. One of the things I had to finally define, and this is a part of my story you may know, but we haven't talked about it here, but I had several relationships with men who were addicted to drugs. And twice I had boyfriends who died while they were my boyfriend from overdoses. And that's one of those things that, like, for me in my experience, it felt like it snuck up on me, that there's no way I could see it coming. But I look back on it now and it's just like, wow, I must have really been deep in my trauma that I couldn't see something like that coming. Like, one of them, I had no idea that he even had a drug problem. One of them, I knew that he did, but he had been off for many years. And then, when the trouble came and it became obvious something was going on, my mind would go into this weird kind of frantic denial and control efforts and kind of classic. And then, things just spun out of control and I couldn't stop it from happening. And next thing you know, they had died. And they were many years apart, but it happened twice. And twice is enough to say, wow, my trauma is going to like destroy my life if I don't change. So in the weird way that some of the worst things can be the greatest blessings, I finally got clear, like, I've got to stop trying to do this myself and I've got to really find actual help for this.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, my perception was just not reliable. So on the thread of perception, I just couldn't see it coming. And my instincts about how to handle it once I knew it was happening were wrong. And it was largely driven by old trauma messages, tapes in there, and just really unhelpful to me and to them, not kind. I've gone to Al-Anon and I've learned a lot. Like, if somebody is in the middle of a relapse, it's not a good idea to go in there and start yelling at them or making demands on them, It's not like I didn't know that, but when it's happening to you and your whole life is falling apart around it, it's really hard not to do that. But if you're hiding that this is a problem in your life, then you have no support for it. When you're trying to hide, you don't want anybody to know that this guy that you were so excited to be dating has this huge problem. There's no support. So that's where I was really vulnerable in my life at a lot of points, where when stuff was getting hard, I didn't have people who I had been honest with at all about what was going on, and I didn't know who to go to. So when I really got serious about healing, I had always known who I could go to, and I had one friend who mentored me about relationships. I went and got EMDR, which was kind of a lucky stroke, that somebody who was a really gifted practitioner. We had a mutual friend, saw me at a party at a time when I had not a penny to my name, just said, I'll give you free EMDR. And it just was transformative. And then I read these books. There just was a massive shift once there was the word C-PTSD for what I had. And knowing that just gave me a way to look at, like, when I was doing something irrational out of trauma thinking. That's what I say. Oh, that sounds like PTSD thinking. That's what I say to people when they sound like they're saying something odd, like, well, the trouble is all men only want women who are sluts and they never want to commit. And I'm like, that sounds like PTSD talking. All men are really different and unique and have different interests. And there are many who would be very happy to marry you, I'm sure. So that's PTSD thinking. So to get out of that, to get that perception back is a process. It's not an overnight thing, but it's calming the triggers that are causing the PTSD to have its way with your thinking, and the PTSD is talking, to calm it down, and then to interact consistently with people, help you reason that out. So in my community and the membership, so people do this thing we call the daily practice, like 50,000 people. I have 50,000 students who have learned it, and many of them are active, and they come to calls, and they're in this Facebook group, and they're encouraged to find a buddy. And a buddy is somebody who also is doing what you're doing, and you can read to them what you wrote. And you read it to them, and they don't try to fix you, and they don't comment or say, well, that's a dumb way to feel. They just go, thank you very much. Thank you for reading that. And then you can ask them, what do you think? Should I call my mom again? And you can ask your friends to think about that with you. But there's something so precious about friends who also use these techniques, who also know what C-PTSD is. They know that you're vulnerable because they're vulnerable like that too. And together, people can kind of figure things out. So in the dating course, I just really encourage people, you've got to have a buddy. It's really important to have a group of people you can do that with. And I think that's one of the things that 12-step groups do so well, is you have a sounding board to get a reality check on your perception. And so with that, the third step is to start blundering through your life again. You don't have to put all these limits and say, I'll never date. I'll just never talk to anybody. I'll hide in my house. Because that's not how you grow either. You got to go out there and give it a try, make some mistakes, say hello, socialize a little bit, get rejected, and just keep running it through. Keep running it through the techniques, sharing with your buddy, getting feedback, supporting yourself so that you're loved and connected with people even when you get rejected on a date. And that's how we grow. That's where our development got delayed, is without the positive feedback and support, we had to sort of just put everything in cement, not going to go there, go into denial. We don't have to do that anymore. We can actually just get rejected and cry and run to our buddies and just go, it happened again. And then next thing you know, you're both having a chuckle about it. Yeah. All right.
No, that totally makes sense. So if I'm understanding correctly, of course, the first and always should be your first step is to re-regulate. And they can do that using your process or whatever process is comfortable for them. Mm-hmm. And then make sure that you have clarity on what it is that you want and to be honest with that. And mm-hmm. then to have a sounding board of people who can kind of give you feedback and make sure that you're not misconstruing or misperceiving something. Did I get all of that?
Or to do their best, they're fallible too, but to get out of hiding when we're in distress or when we're ashamed, to get out of hiding and start getting used to admitting to other people. And when they admit to you, it starts to get a lot more normal and safe and sometimes dear, the way we just get so effed up about things, Because that's really what trauma looks like. It's not just about the abuse that happened when we were 5 or whatever. It's about feeling like an idiot today in the interaction that you had with some cashier or something. That's what's driving it today.
Right. And I think the more that we have those negative experiences, the harder it is to push through it, and the easier it is to blame ourselves for it. I always would think, well, maybe it's just me. I'm attracting all of this negativity and that's why it's happening, or I'm causing the issue. And so being able to separate your reactions and what you do and what has happened from yourself and see that I think is very healing as well. And so it's all about being honest with yourself and with the people around you. It's difficult though. I did have a question for you, because to swing back around to your YouTube channel and how you started that business, for those of us like myself, I'm going to be a little selfish here, who would like to make an impact. Do you have any tips on how we can do that successfully?
That's such a big
Sorry to
question.
put you there on the spot.
Yeah, no, it's a big question. It's an important question. My healing has allowed me to be successful in business, and having a business has contributed a lot to my healing. Like it's a mutual relationship. I will say that as somebody with C-PTSD, having a boss and working in a job was pretty hard for me. Very triggering and not full of opportunities. So first I ended up being a consultant, and that was a good arrangement. And now I'll tell you what I love about what I'm doing now is I have a YouTube channel. I have produced online courses that people take. I lead these calls, and I have these incredibly deep, rich contacts with people. In my deeper coaching programs, what I teach is that this healing, it's not really just about feeling better, like a substitute for antidepressants or something. We do need to feel better. We need to feel better like right away in our healing efforts, because it feels so bad to be throttled by C-PTSD. So we do need to feel better. But the whole point of our healing, it's that like recovery from C-PTSD is a doorway to this world that we're entering into, which is where we've become our real selves and we're using our gifts. And so I was lucky enough to be mentored some years back by somebody incredibly wise who helped me determine like where my gifts really lay. It's not always something that you're talented in. I'm very multi-talented. I'm scrappy. I'm good at a lot of things. Like I'm a really fast typist, but typing's not my gift. It's a skill that I have. But I got help figuring out that when I tell my story, and this is what you're looking for to find out what your gift is, you look for the thing that people have told you over and over again you made a difference in their lives. Because really, like deep down, we all need to be tapped into that part of us that has something to bring to the world that we can feel good about and that will kind of draw us forth out of ourselves, even when we don't even know what's ahead or what we want. It draws us forth into something. And I said, well, I've just noticed that when I tell my story, people tend to gather around me. And the other thing, I thought, well, maybe writing is a gift, because writing has always played a role in the work that I've done. I'm pretty good at it. So I started the blog of Crappy Childhood Fairy in order to test telling my story in writing. And that's how it started. And what's funny is, to this day, there's a blog on my website, and it's good, but it's nowhere near as impactful on the world as the videos on YouTube. That ended up being what it is. And I'll tell you something funny, and is in my career, I used to be a comedian, and then I quit. I just found that too stressful, and I quit, and I thought, well, there I am, a failed comedian. But no, like everything I've done has been preparation for what I'm doing now. And I had a video production company. I was a consultant on patient experience for healthcare people, where I had to learn all this emotional intelligence. And even when you're not feeling it with people, what do you say? It turns out like all my life, I've been drawn towards learning what I really am and what I'm really good at. And so much of the work I've done has been preparation for what I'm doing now. In my video company, I used to direct people on camera all the time. And I kept thinking, they're struggling right now. And sometimes I'd sit down to show them, here's what I want you to do. And I'd say what they needed to say. And I would say it so well. So then I'm like, well, I should just be on the camera. So finally I turned it around on myself, and I started making these videos. And there was something about my gift that connected with the world that all of a sudden electrified, and that became my career, and that became what I do. And I don't know where it's going exactly. I work really hard on it. I put out 3 videos a week. I'm managing this community. I have a team of 3 people who work for me, plus some part-timers. And I'm writing a book right now, which I think is really important. But it's all, like, I work so hard on this. And every morning I wake up just thinking about it and like, all right, I'm gonna do this. I've never felt this connected to my work in my life. And it's a joy. But it wasn't always like this.
Right. And I think that's so important. And I totally resonated with what you said, because I found that too. I had this one night, I was having a terrible, terrible week, and I was up all night. All of a sudden, I had this idea. And as I was looking back at my life, I'm like, oh my gosh, all of those things that I did and then quit, like all tie into what I'm doing now. And then I started the podcast and I'm like, oh, I love this. I love connecting with people. And it's so funny because I struggle to connect with people, like I mentioned. But when I'm talking to people via the screen, it's almost like I don't put up that shield of protection because they're not here. So I can really connect with people and talk to them this way. And it's been a powerful thing. When you're looking for your gifts, I know I think it was my second episode, they talked about looking back at your jobs and seeing all the things that you liked, even if it wasn't the job in general. Mm-hmm. So for those of our listeners who don't know what their passions or their skills are, that's a good way to start. Start making a list of everything that you always loved in your life. Mm-hmm. Even if it's talking to people when you were working at a gas station or whatever it might be. But I feel like if people were really to hone in on that purpose, it's almost like a spark or an ember within them that needs to be nourished, because I think that's where people find their fulfillment. So what I'm hearing from you is find your purpose and then push forward that way. And that will help you along your healing journey. And then also with personal fulfillment, which I think is huge.
Yeah. Well, I get weird in conversations too, but I feel really connected to you, talking to you. And I believe that's because we have a purpose right now. We're very purposefully trying to communicate something for the benefit of other people. And that, I think, is a hallmark of a gift versus a talent. Like, typing is not something people go, when you type, my life changes. And actually, some people who do administrative work do change lives. Like they create an anchor for a group of people or an organization that makes the whole thing safe and trustworthy and, creates mobility for people to transition from one thing to another. So it could be that can be how we use our gifts. The sign you look for is, what are people telling you over and over again? That when you did this thing, like when we all had dinner at your house that night on the paper plates, I just felt so loved. Or that night you came and brought me Tylenol when I was sick. When you were sitting with me, it just allowed me to go to sleep. And this is very different from codependence. Codependence is when you try to manipulate people by doing things for them, and you do it resentfully, not authentically. So instead, we just sort of look back and we go, when have I heard that? Like, what have I done in my life where I kept hearing that feedback that it made a difference? And it doesn't have to be 1,000 people said it, but there was a powerful impact. So for me, that's what it was. When you tell your story, I had this ability to inspire people. They would want to take some step up. If I was talking in a business context, they'd want to do something more businessy. If I was talking about my spiritual life, they'd want to take a step spiritually. And it was so ironic because how many times have I thought, I have these techniques. They're so great. If only everybody would do them. You guys, you got to do this. And people were just like, I've never been able to push anybody into taking a step up. But sometimes when I tell my story, they feel inspired. And so that ended up, I just allowed that to be my direction. And I've been feeling my way. And that's what I think life is like. And it's like feeling your way in the dark sometimes. And that's what I think dysregulation is like, is you had a little bit of light and it goes out and you can't tell. And so when you find yourself like walking into a tree in the dark, you don't go, why am I such an idiot? You're just like, why can't I see the tree? And that's what C-PTSD is. We can't always see the tree. And so when we're caring for ourselves with it, we carry the flashlight. We know we can't see the trees, so we help ourselves out with some workarounds, respecting that we need a little bit of a boost sometimes, but that our potential is quite great if we can do that.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I love that you teach that technique, because my therapist tried to do that with me for forever. And I would always get so mad because I'm like, I should just be able to do it, damn it. Like, I don't want to have a workaround. Just do it. Do it the way normal people do it. And I would get so angry. And it wasn't until I found that compassion for myself and giving myself the space to, maybe I need a workaround. And it's funny because it just popped into my head why I did this. It was watching The Good Doctor, which is about an autistic doctor, and he had to have workarounds, and somehow that made it click. But I think that it is important for people to realize that, it's not just you. You just need a flashlight, like you said. And I don't connect with my emotions, but now I'm going to get all emotional. But I just want to, thank you for what it is that you do, because it has impacted my life greatly. And in a time where I couldn't express what was going on with me, because literally I would start a conversation and then just my mind would blank out. Your videos helped me explain what was going on. So thank you.
Oh, yay. That feels so good to hear. Thank you.
Yeah. And we're probably a very similar age, but I hope I can grow up to be just like you. No.
I think you're probably younger. I'm 58.
A little bit.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
is there anything that, well, I know there's tons I might have missed because we could talk about this forever.
Yeah.
But is there anything that I might have missed that you feel could be communicated to somebody who is in their healing journey and wants to make a difference or wants to change their lives?
Well, I have a free course, and I'm going to share a link with you that you can share with people. And you can learn the techniques that I use in less than an hour and see if they help you. And, you have to put your email in to access the course. And then I send you an email and invite you to these calls with me, and you can come ask questions and write and meditate together with other people. And it's lovely. And everybody's invited. So I just want to share that with people. That's when people are just like, yeah, but isn't there anything else I can do? And I'm just like, I'm so boring, you guys. There's like this one thing I'm just really trying to teach a lot of people to do because it's incredibly helpful to many people. It's been the great joy of my life to show people what helped me and to be able to watch them before my eyes start to transform and watch the fog clear in their thinking, and they're beginning to take steps forward. So everyone's invited.
Absolutely. And I'll definitely put all of that information in the show notes. And I actually have to revisit it because when I first started all of this, I did download it and I did a lot of the techniques, and then I kind of moved away from it because I was not in a good place to do that. But now I need to go back and really explore that.
It works on so many levels. And I would just also say, like, sometimes people say that to me, like, I'm too stressed to meditate, or I'm not in a good place to get free of my fear. And I'm just like, the whole reason this thing exists is for desperate people like I was that night when my friend took me in and showed me how to do it. You couldn't have been in a worse place than I was in. That's what it's for. And then I carry on even on good days. And after we talk, I'm going to go do it again. I did it this morning.
For those of you who don't know Anna, you guys can find her on YouTube at the Crappy Childhood Fairy on her website as well. And I will put all of that information in the show notes. But Anna, I want to thank you so, so much for all of your time.
Thank you.
And all of that wonderful information. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, thank you for all you're doing and for creating a platform here.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. That means a lot coming from you.
It's only me.
All right. Guys, thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll be back to wrap up the show right after this. Thank you so much for joining me today. I truly enjoyed that conversation with Anna. I hope it was informative for you. I'm going to put all of her links in the show notes so that you have access to her group and her courses and her awesome videos. If you enjoyed this episode, I would love it if you would leave a review or a comment. And of course, come back next week. I release an episode every Tuesday on the podcast and every Sunday on the YouTube channel, depending on whether you rather listen or watch. A couple things that I want to cover. If you are having trouble with parenting or boundaries, check out episode number 11. I have a language of listening coach who comes on and talks all about how to set boundaries for yourself in your relationship with your kids and other aspects of your life. If you need to learn how to find your passion, check out episode number 3. We discussed that technique that I talked about today on how to really hone down on what drives you, what passion fulfills you, the interest that you have. Please nourish that spark. It's there for a reason. Last but not least, if you are struggling to find the courage to pursue your dreams, know that you are worth it, know that you deserve it, and that the world is waiting for your message. Check out episode number 9, where I talk to a courage coach. So thank you so much for your time. I truly appreciate it. And I'll catch you next time on the Biz Essentials.
You've been listening to the Biz Essentials. Thanks for listening to the show. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information, learning how to be productive, be successful, be joyful, and more importantly, be yourself, and turning your dreams into successful passion projects. By listening to this show, you've already set into motion the most important part, starting. So it's important to catch the next episode. Make sure to like, rate, and review the show. In the meantime, hook up with us on social media at Veronika Ventures and at the Biz Essentials. Till next time, this is the Biz Essentials.
Today's quote of the day is by Helen Wilson. She once said, "It isn't in my past, it's in my everyday." That's very true. You can't get rid of your past. You can't get rid of the things that happened to you, but you can certainly heal from them and move forward. Anyway, guys, Thank you so much for joining me today. I truly appreciate it, and I'll see you next time on the Biz Essentials. Bye.